Hi everyone, you will be pleased to know I have returned. There is no more squirrel on the site. The squirrel has been taken out the front door, captured by the dog under the chair, under the china cabinet in the dining room, scooped into a wastebasket, and tossed out the front door. Squirrel saga ended. That beautiful fairy dog that you saw earlier, our border collie, caught the squirrel for us. She cornered him. So yay to Libby the border collie. Great, good video, good audio. Doc, why don't you try signing in, sign out, sign in again, and see if that improves the video for you. The parsha that we're looking at this evening is Vayetzi, which covers Genesis chapter 28, verse 10 through 32, verse 3. This is the parsha in which we see Jacob's ladder and Jacob's dream. We see Jacob taking his journey, going forth to the land of Haran, where he came from, hopefully to get a wife from his mother's family. We see Jacob's life in Haran, or his father-in-law, his marriage to two women, Leah and then Rachel, the birthing of his children, and finally his return home again. We have some interesting things in this parsha. First thing that I want to talk about is the heavenly dream. When Jacob is going to sleep, he's lying down using a rock, and he's saying, in this place, ha-makom, in the place. This was originally one of the many names that we used for God. Wild cow. Did you know that, Sarah, that Leah translates into English as wild cow? Think about that in relation to your personality and try it on and see how it fits. And of course, Adi adds a Star Wars theme to our conversation. Yeah, and Rachel's name in English is Ewe, E-W-E, as in sheep, because I guess she was kind of like the shy one, and Leah was the wilder one. Oh, thanks, Lanny. Yes, you're right. It is very moving. So anyway, we go back to the beginning, where Jacob's going to bed. He's left his land behind him, because his brother is very upset over having gotten the blessing. And now Jacob is going to get to taste the fruit of his deception. So he's headed off to the land of the Easterners. He finds the stone. There's a well. It's open. 3 flocks of sheep are there. The flocks are watered. The stone was large. They would have to have 3 shepherds to roll that stone from off the mouth of the well. And he says to the shepherds, wow, where are you from? And they said, we came from Haran. And he asks if they know his uncle, Laban, the son of Nahor. And they go, yeah, we do. And he's well, and look yonder, there comes his daughter, Rachel. And Rachel, when the minute that Jacob sees Rachel, his adrenaline and his testosterone kick in. And by himself, a single man alone, he is able to move the stone off the top of the well, and so he could water his uncle's flock. And then he kissed Rachel and broke into tears. Then he told her who he was. Sounds kind of like Isaac right now and Rebecca. And hearing the news, Laban runs to meet him, embraces him, kisses him, and takes him into his house. And Laban says, you truly are my bone and flesh. Yeah, we're back to the camels. And we will see the camels, and Ed reappears later on, Sarah. So Jacob stayed there an entire month. went to work for his uncle, and, what do you want your wages to be? And Jacob says that he would be willing to work 7 years in order to marry Rachel because he loved her so much. Laban shook hands. They traded shoes, made the deal, made the pact, and Jacob served his 7 years. And they seemed like only a few days because he was so deeply in love with Rachel. And then on the wedding night, the brides were switched, and he ended up with Leah, the older sister, because as Laban shrugs it off, we don't marry the younger until we have married off the older. Now, some of the commentators say that Jacob knew who he was marrying. Some say he doesn't. We got the tradition of, the old bait and switch, you got it. And this is why today in devout Orthodox communities, they hold a bedekin ceremony before the wedding where the groom puts the veil on the bride's face. And he covers her before the ceremony so that there is no bait and switch, and he's certain he's got the correct bride, the one that he's made the deal for. So we will go back, and now that he's been baited and switched and deceived and gotten the wife, yes, Adi, that's where that tradition has come from. Then Jacob said, give me my wife. And Jacob, he went to Laban and said, that's it. And Laban says, okay, wait a week, enjoy this bride, and then I'll give you your next bride, and you can take and marry Rachel too. You got one sister, you might as well take them all. And Leah knew that payback. Deception breeds deception. And Leah knew she was the unloved wife, and God filled her womb. She had son after son after son, where Rachel stayed barren. And Rachel gave her, Jacob knew that it was Leah and not Rachel, and he always puts Leah's name before Rachel when mentioning the matriarchs. Let's see. Okay. Well, congratulations, Doc. That's pretty cool to know that. I'm thinking about the order of the wives. And then Jacob consorts with both the handmaidens, Zilpah and Bilhah, and has additional children. And then come those camels. When he is headed back towards his home, we see that Jacob puts his children and wives on camels. He drove off all his livestock, all the wealth he accumulated, and went to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. And Rachel stole the household idols, and when Laban came home, he discovered it. He took off after the children. He caught up to them, and Jacob and he made a pact after he searched Rachel's tent and all the other tents in the gear for his household idols. And the only place not searched was underneath of Rachel because she said she was in the way of women, which meant she was on her monthly cycle, and as such, she was ritually impure. And here's where we get a foreign word into the text, because when Laban and Jacob set the pillar to set the boundary and to make that place, Jacob says they come make a pact to be witnesses between them that this is the way it is. They gathered stones, they made the mound, they partook, Laban and Jacob, of a meal there, and then Laban named it Yagar Sahadusa. Well, Jacob named it Galed. This is because Jacob spoke Hebrew and Laban spoke Aramaic. Whenever our people speak Aramaic in the text and they're quoted, the text is has the Aramaic words in it. But where the text is written in the narrative, it is written in Hebrew. So that's just a point of interest. But we talk about this and we talk about journeys. We talk about dreams. Yes, no, she is not buried with the others. Rachel was buried alongside the road where she passed away. And that's where she is till this day. She has not been removed. So when we look at this, what we see are a lot of journeys happening. We see spiritual journeys where Jacob is battling with the angel on the side of the river. We see spiritual journeys where the ladder is going up and down and the angels are descending up and down. And God says that I am the God of your father, Abraham, God of Isaac, and I will give you the ground on which you are lying. This ground will be to you and to your offspring. Now, some people look at this and say that means the only ground that we as Jews were given was just the ground on which Isaac was lying, just that one small section, while others say it refers to that entire area. Yes, that's correct. And the goddess names that they have, which is Wild Cow and You, came from Babylonia, I believe. I have those written down here, so I will find those when I turn that page. They were the titles of Mesopotamian goddesses that were well known in Canaan. And there is no word in the biblical Hebrew for goddess. But when we go back to the dream with the ladder, God is saying, I'm going to give you this land, the land on which you're lying. And your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. They will spread out to the west, the east, the north, the south. And we have seen in retrospect that that is true, that as Jews, we have left the land of the east and we have spread out around the world. We've gone north and south and east and west and so on. But when Jacob woke up from his sleep, he sat up and said, Ha! Achen yesh Adonai ba'makom hazeh. God was in this place. Hamakom hazeh. Va'anochi lo yadati. And I, Anochi lo yadati, did not know it. Which makes me wonder, how do we know when God manifests in our lives? How do we recognize that moment? God appeared in a dream to Jacob, and Jacob recognized that dream, sat up and goes, wow, I didn't realize this. I didn't know God was in this place. I just didn't recognize it. So how do we know? And how do we recognize when God's in our space? How do we recognize a spiritual experience when we have one? Because that's really what Jacob had here, was a spiritual experience. Let's see what kind of comments those of you who are here have that you'd like to share. How do you recognize when you've had a spiritual experience on this journey? Because truly, all life is a journey. We start in one place and move forward. Whether we're going on a spiritual journey or a physical journey, we are always going forth. The past has happened and we can't reclaim it, so we have to go forth. Sarah says, by the results of the experience. Okay. What kind of results would we expect to see, Sarah? Do you have any idea? Take a little moment here, get caught up, give you folks a chance to answer, think about this. Naora says, I feel his presence through the people experiences I encounter a lot. Okay. So that's how you recognize when you've had a spiritual experience, that you feel the presence of God with you. Well, I wait for some to see if more responses. I'll share with you the most profound and deeply spiritual experience that I ever had. I was officiating at a funeral. It was at the graveside, and as I was reciting the words and saying the prayers, I felt the air shift behind me, and I could feel the world beyond. As plainly, I couldn't see it, I couldn't touch it, but I could feel the wide open yawningness of it, and knew, as clear as a bell, that I was standing on the edge between two worlds. And it was deep. So we have some more comments. We have Michael, who says, when I've had a dream about God, they tend to be fairly scary. Oh, wow. Okay. And Sarah says there will be some uncanny results. And I missed a comment. Doc says you see prior people have experiences and knew it was the same. Okay. Naora says, I get goosebumps and an overwhelming emotional feeling. That's what I had standing there in that winter wind that day with my wool coat on to stay warm, and feeling that open precipice behind me in that big yawning space. And I haven't felt that since, but I knew the gates were open then. So what about the idea of, we'll move forward a little bit and go forth further into the text. And what we find next is Jacob is negotiating with God. You know, how many of us have negotiated with God and said, yeah, okay, if God, you'll remain with me, and God, if you'll give me this. In Jacob's case, he says, if you protect me on this journey that I'm making, if you give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, if I can return safely to my father's house, well, then you will be my God. And this stone, which I have set up as a pillar, will be God's abode. Beth El, house of God. And all that you give me, well, then I will set aside a tithe, or a tithe, for you. So how many of us have negotiated with God looking for different items? Many, many times, says Michael. Probably different. God's in the darkness too. You're correct, Nora. God is all, which means God is in both the darkness and in the light. Eric says, guilty of negotiating. So here's the next question. Adi, no. Sarah says she tries not to. Lanny says, that's why we have Kol Nidre. Adi says, well, I tried, but never works out for me. Negotiating, that is. That was my next question. How has it worked out for you when you've negotiated, or you've attempted to negotiate with God and say, all right, give me this, and yeah, okay, I'll be a believer. If you give me what I want, you can be my God. But if you don't give me what I want, maybe I'll think about it. Any of you gotten what you've asked for when you've negotiated? I certainly haven't. Ah, Audie's taking that back. Okay. So does this mean you got some? Michael says he doesn't go quite to that extent. Not as far as Jacob does, huh? And Audie says he'll give me, and when it doesn't work out well, God gives to me, and then it doesn't work out well. Well, I have found from personal experience that God doesn't give me what I want when I want it. I can negotiate till I'm blue in the face. If I were a rich man, is Doc's answer. Good answer. But I've negotiated, and hasn't worked out for me, and I find I end up getting what I need rather than what I want, which is not always the same thing. And Michael says, he just saw Fiddler on the Roof for the first time a couple of nights ago. Good for you, Michael. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a great story, or series of stories combined into one. So do you think negotiation works for Jacob as well? Is God going to provide him with everything he's asking for? Clothes, food, returning to his father's house, protect him on his journey? What do you think? Very true, Sarah. Light is like a fiddler on the roof. Very true. Michael says, I think God provided way more than Jacob bargained for. Lanny says that Jim Morrison said you cannot petition the Lord with prayer. Well, now that's an interesting comment because we petition the Lord with prayer all the time. It doesn't mean that we always get answers, or we get answers in something else. The greyhounds for Nora are competing for her attention. They must have seen my border collie's picture. Poor sweet Vivi girl, huh? Well, Jacob does seem to get protection on his journey. He does appear to get food to eat. He appears to get plenty of drink. Appears to get new clothing to wear. That's true, Naora. It is mankind who needs prayer. That's why the word for prayer, the hipatel, is a reflexive verb because it reflects us. It's a reflexive. We are praying back for things for ourselves, not for God, because God does not need our prayers. And like George Burns says, according to Lanny, sometimes the answer is just plain no. And that's correct. Now, in our story here, our narrative, Jacob did get what he asked for. The problem is he got more than he bargained for, like I believe it was Lanny who said, because not only did he get it, but he got deceived in the process. So his bad behavior, his deception catches up with him, and he continues on, and everything he wants is either slightly out of reach or there's a twist in it somewhere. There was a twist in his romance with Rachel. He ended up with Leah. There was a twist in his agreement with Laban. Yeah, it's a repeating story because Laban was deceptive himself and was willing to take Jacob for everything he could get out of him. took his sheep and his flocks, sorted them out, got both his daughters married off, got plenty of grandchildren out of it. But Rachel didn't get that. She only ended up with 2 children. She ended up with Joseph, as in Joseph of many colors, Joseph coat, and she ended up with Benjamin, her youngest Benjamin. And it was in childbirth with Benjamin that Rachel passed away by the side of the road. So even though she was well loved, she didn't have the fullness of life that her sister had. And in those days, being a woman, your identity was tied up with how many children that you could provide for your husband. Because children were your future, they were your retirement plan, they were everything. And sons were more important than daughters because sons carried the wealth. They brought wives into the family where when you had daughters, daughters left the family and married out elsewhere. So you'd lose your daughters to somebody else, but your sons stayed in the family. Your workforce. That's correct. This is the workforce. The sons will help the father. They will take over. The daughters help the mom. But when the daughters marry and leave home, then the daughter-in-laws will take over their job and care for the mom. It's quality, not just quantity, says Doc. That's correct. Because if you get sons that are lazy and they don't want to help at all and they're argumentative and they're obnoxious, then they're not really all that helpful. You want sons that are good quality and helpful. So those are what we're looking at there. So we go on in the story, and after Rachel had given birth to Jacob, Jacob comes to Laban and says, okay, I want to go home. I want to go back to my father's land. I want to take my wives, my children, for whom I've served you. I want to take my flocks and go home. And Laban continues his usual deceitful ways and says, well, if you'll indulge me, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me on your account. Name the wages that are due from me, and I will pay you. But Jacob says, you know how well I've served you, how your livestock has fared. For the little you had before I came has grown too much, because God has blessed you wherever I turned. And now, Jacob says, when can I make provision for my own family, my own household? And Laban says again, what am I going to pay you? What are the wages you want? Sarah says, I want to take my toys and go. Yeah, that's right. And Jacob says, pay me nothing. If you will do this, I will go out again, and I will pasture and keep your flocks. I will pass through your entire flock today, and I will take out every speckled and spotted animal, every dark-colored sheep, every speckled and spotted goat, and those will be my wages. In the future, when you go over my wages, let my honesty, toward you testify for me. If there are among my goats any that are not speckled or spotted, or any sheep that are not colored, they got there by theft. And Laban agrees. So now, that same day, Jacob took out all the streak-spotted goats, all the speckled and spotted goats, the she-goats, every one that had white, all the dark-colored sheep, and left them in charge of his sons. Then he put a distance of 3 days' journey between him and Laban's Then Laban put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob was pasturing the rest of the flocks. And here's something very interesting for a book that does not believe in witches and magic and divination. Jacob got fresh shoots of poplar, almond and plain. He peeled white strips from them. He laid bare the white of the shoots. He set them up in front of the goats in the troughs, the water receptacles that the goats came to drink from. Their mating occurred, and since the goats mated by the rods, the goats brought forth streaked and speckled and spotted young. But Jacob dealt separately with the sheep. He made these animals face the streaked or wholly spotted dark animals in the flock, and so he produced separate flocks for himself, which he did not put with Laban's flocks. And when the sturdier animals were mating, Jacob would place the rods in the trough in full view of the animals, so they mated by them. But with the feebler, weaker animals, he would not place the rods. And the feeble ones, therefore, ended up going back to Laban, and the stronger and the better ones, all of which now are speckled, spotted, and dark colored, came to Jacob. And the man grew sturdily and exceedingly prosperous. He came to own large quantities of flocks, servants, camels. Right, early genetic engineering. But how do we understand this text? If we're leaving out magic and divination because that's not something we're allowed, how do we explain this? How do we account for this? And do we know if it's worked? Has anybody actually tried this? Does anybody have goats or sheep? What do we learn from this story? Torah says, no, there is a difference between crossbreeding and the GMOs of today. Okay. Do we have any other comments? It showed that God would bless them. Okay. That's true. Jacob was blessed by God because God continued to have Jacob prosper. And Laban was not prospering at this point. He was ending up with the feebler sheep. Based on Jacob's pattern of deception, do you think there's any deception going on here? Is Jacob being completely honest? Or is he taking his chances? Is this something that's going to come back and bite him in the tuchus? What do we think? Any comments? We're going to give you a minute or two here and see if comments show up. You must all be thinking about this, huh? Not sure? Give him a break. It was another 7 years. You're right, yeah. So now he's building his own flocks. Blessed with such bounty because Laban deceived him on his wages. Yes, that's correct, he did. Laban was a deceitful uncle in the first place. And he was so nice when he married off his sister Rebecca back a few chapters. Sent her off on a beautiful camel named Ed. Since I don't know how long a camel's lifespan is, I'm sure by now we're up to Ed Jr. Okay, then we'll move forward into our story. Now Jacob is leaving Haran, and he's leaving Laban's sphere of influence, and the last deception of the story is perpetrated. That's true, you could say that, Lanny. Providing wives to the patriarchs is part of Laban's claim to fame. That and his terrific deception practices. But now, the last act of deception is about to be formed. He is about to be cheated out of his household goods by his own daughter, Rachel. And Jacob, through his wife's theft, unknowingly exposes her to unforeseen danger. Thus, deception returns. Truthfulness, the virtue associated with Jacob as a patriarch. Sarah, that's a very good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure. I know that we've seen Jacob be deceptive quite a bit, so I don't know about truthfulness. We could ask Rabbi Patrick and see what he knows about that. Yeah, because he lied to Isaac about who he was. He is deceived and be deceived. So now, yeah, he stole the bird. Well, he didn't quite steal it. He traded it away for a bowl of lentil soup. We could look at that as stealing, but quite frankly, Esau made a really bad deal. But, Jacob was willing to make that bad deal and to negotiate for that birthright because he didn't believe that Esau deserved that birthright. He didn't deserve to be the carrier on of the family Abrahamic tradition. Yeah, good negotiating. I would say Jacob is an excellent negotiator. He might do well in hostile takeovers today if he was around. He might be very good at that. So, we're getting to the point now with the final deception. Laban's sons are grumbling about Jacob. They're upset because they feel he's taking the best of the flocks while they're not getting anything that's good. And they say he's taken everything that was our father's. And from that which was our father's, he has built up his own wealth. And Laban's manner towards Jacob is not nearly as good as it used to be. And so Jacob brought Leah and Rachel to him. Yeah, hostile takeover. Good idea. Good description. And he called Leah and Rachel to the field where his flock is and says, "Your father has cheated me time and time again about my wages. He's changed them over and over and over. He takes away the streaked are my wages. All the flocks drop streaked young." And Rachel and Leah wanted to know if they still had a share in the inheritance of their father's house now that he has sold them to Jacob. And so now they leave. And Jacob packs up his wife, both his wives, and his children, and they're all on camels. And he drove off all his livestock and all the wealth that he had amassed, all the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac back in Canaan. And we only have about 7 minutes left. And so we saw where they set up the pillar. We know that, yeah, and this is their father. Yeah, great guy. Isaac is kind of like the weakling of 3 patriarchs. Jacob is a strong man. Abraham is a strong man. In comparison, Isaac is not. He's the quiet guy. Strong, silent type. And altogether, Jacob spent 20 years in the service of Laban. Yeah, he was the middleman. And so after spending the 20 years, he's definitely entitled to go home. So before we end, do we have any comments on the Parsha, on the fact that Rachel is stealing her dad's household gods and idols and holding on to them, and that Jacob is leaving a far richer man than he arrived, with family that he didn't have when he went. And of course, he's worried about going home and running into his brother, Esau, and seeing what happens with them. So do we have any comments or questions? It shows you that family relations can be very challenging and very difficult. Is there anyone here that has any challenging and or difficult family relations? Or do you have families that are wonderfully peaceful, calm, and no challenging relationships? Any comments? I hadn't thought of that, Neora, that Jacob's ladder is the DNA helix. That's a good point. I wouldn't have thought of that. She worshipped idols, couldn't be buried with the others. That's correct. Okay, Neora says, difficult family relations. Sure have those. And Lanny says, my family puts the fun in dysfunctional. Okay. I had a cousin who used to put a squirrel. No, not a squirrel. My cousin had hamsters. And every year he would come to our place for Thanksgiving from Chicago, and he would take my other cousin's hamsters and he would drop them down our little girls' dresses so that we would scream and so on. And, you know, I've never been fond of that cousin. Right, even with bad family, you can prosper with the hand of God. We can learn how to get along with each other. For all his deceit, Jacob manages to get along with Laban. The Hebrew letters make up DNA. It's very interesting. Yes, you're correct. Now, before we do end, I want to remind you that one show and punktorah run on donations. This is a nonprofit company, and we would like you to go right up there to the right corner of your screen, and you see that yellow button that says donate. we would like to ask you to make a donation. Even if it's only a couple of dollars, they all add up. There's 9 of us online. If everybody was to donate $5, that would give us $45, which goes a long way to help running one show and being able to do these live streaming and keep these Torah studies and services going for all of you that enjoy these and appreciate them. So we hope that you'll go hit the donate button and donate what you could afford to donate. Look into your heart and see what you can donate to help us prosper. And yes, speckled, spotted, and dark shekalim would all be appreciated. They will manifest riches tenfold back to you in the form of services, Torah studies, classes, and so on that you will continue to enjoy. Now you're welcome to hang out. I'm going to stop recording the broadcast, and feel free to hang out as long as you would like. And I will put up a nagoon for a few minutes to end class with.
Bina